Hello, 8th graders. This is the last lecture for this week. This covers the work that you are to do on April 24th. And yes, this lecture will be very long because it is going to cover information for 4 different exercises which you are to do today. The exercises are 1613, 1614, 1615, and 1616. And if you're saying, but why, Mrs. Shoemate, why do we have to do extra today? Well, these 2 sections of information really go together in a lot of ways. And you'll see that as we go throughout this lecture. So I think it best if we cover both sections together so that you can see the difference. All right. So for the first slide out of 7, talk about quotation marks first. Quotation marks are used to indicate words taken from another source or to show the words of speakers in a dialogue. And if you've forgotten what a dialogue is, it's when at least 2 people are talking to each other back and forth. Okay, so anytime that happens, you know that you have quotation marks around the actual words of the speakers. Also, if you are referencing the exact words that someone else said, you're quoting someone as in an essay or whatever, then you put quotation marks around their exact words. There are examples of both of these types of things at the top of 335. I would highly encourage you to look at those. All right. The next thing we want to talk about here is how other marks of punctuation are incorporated when they are next to, adjacent to, included with your quotation marks. Okay, so we have 3 different groupings of these other punctuation marks in how they relate to your quotation marks. Okay, the first grouping is commas and periods. This is an easy one. As long as you remember the rule, this is easy to know what to do. Commas and periods always go inside of quotation marks. Abby remarked. Next slide. English is my favorite class. Period, then your closing quotes. All right. An example with a comma, same idea. English is not my favorite class, comma, then your closing quotes again, responded Dylan. Okay, so commas and periods always go inside of quotation marks. All right. The next category of other marks with quotation marks is semicolons and colons. And this one, again, is easy as long as you remember what the rule says. This is easy to incorporate. Semicolons and colons, always go outside of quotation marks. Here's an example. One of my favorite short stories is Poe's, quote, The Telltale Heart, quote, semicolon, after the closing quotes. However, go to the next slide. Poe's sense of terror does not appeal to everyone. So again, colons and semicolons always go after closing quotation marks. Okay? Now, the next and final group of other punctuation marks that we have to talk about when we're considering how they work with quotation marks are your exclamation point and your question mark. These aren't terribly difficult, but it's not as easy as memorizing one rule, because where an exclamation point or a question mark goes in relation to the closing quotation marks depends on how your sentence is written and the meaning that it is giving and what it is saying. Follow along with me on this slide. If an entire sentence is asking a question or making an exclamation, okay, so the whole sentence, stuff outside the quotes, is asking a question or showing strong feeling. Then the question mark or exclamation point should be placed outside of quotation marks because it's not just dealing with what's in the quotes. The question or the exclamation is dealing with the whole thing. Here's an example. Only he would say, quotes, I hate everything. Closing quotes, exclamation mark. Here, both parts, not just what's inside the exclamation, or excuse me, not just what's inside the quotation marks, but also the remainder of the sentence, the part that comes before the quotation marks, is showing strong feeling. Only he would say. Therefore, since the part outside the quotation marks is also showing strong feeling, you must use the exclamation point after the quotation marks to show that it is applying to the whole sentence. All right, next slide. This is the other side of that rule. However, if only the quoted material is exclamatory or asking a question, so in this case, only what is inside the quotation marks is showing strong feeling or asking a question, then the exclamation point or question mark should go inside the quotation marks. Sarah replied, comma quotes, how can you hate everything? Question mark quotes. So here, the only thing that's asking a question is what's inside the quotation marks. Therefore, the question mark goes inside the quotation marks. All right, that's all for this slide. Go to the next slide, please. Here is the last rule as it pertains to quotation marks, okay? And this is not in reference to what we discussed before as far as other marks of punctuation with quotation marks, okay? This is another set of items that would get quotation marks around it, okay? Little things, what I call little things, okay, that are not published by themselves get what I call the smaller punctuation marks, which are your quotation marks, okay? If you think about, if you have the name of a short story, The Telltale Heart, the chapter of a book, Nancy Drew Investigates the Stairs, a poem, such as Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, the name of an essay, okay, that someone may have written, an academic essay, okay? None of these is generally big enough to publish on its own. They're all of these generally published as part of a larger work or a larger group of works, okay? Therefore, since they're smaller, they're not published on their own, we use the smaller mark of punctuation, which would be the quotation marks. Look at the next page and I'll try to explain a little bit better than this. Okay? Other things as well that get the smaller quotation marks. Articles inside of a magazine, otherwise known as a periodical. Okay? Articles aren't published by themselves. The names of songs. Usually a song is not published by itself. Usually it is published as part of a larger album or a book of songs, for instance. Okay? And then finally, in this group of smaller works would be the names of given episodes, like a 30-minute episode or a 1-hour episode, or if you're watching Netflix, a 40 or 45-minute episode. The name of such an episode that is part of a larger show, okay, but just the name of the episode itself, the singular episode, would go into quotation marks. Again, not published by itself, generally published as part of a larger work, okay? One example here would be, one of my favorite hymns is quotation marks. how firm a foundation, period quotes. Now, again, when I'm speaking of smaller versus larger, what I mean by that when I'm talking about quotation marks versus underlining is look how much space on your page those quotation marks take up. You've got two little ones at the beginning and two little ones at the end after the name of the song and after the period, okay? However, okay, if you were to use underlining in the place of those quotes, look how much what I would call real estate or space on the page that underlining would take up. You would have to underline all of those words. How firm a foundation takes up a lot more space, which we don't for this one song, okay? But we would for the name of a song book or an album, okay, for instance, okay? And here's more on that rule here in the yellow. On the other hand, large vessels, such as the names of ships, the names of trains, the names of airplanes, the names of spacecraft would be underlined. They're big things, right? Take up a lot of space on the page, the underlining does. Works of art, including the names of paintings and the names of sculptures. These are big things, right? A painting on a wall, a sculpture. Also, they're produced on their own, okay? They get underlining as well. And then finally, long works that are published on their own that I referred to a few moments ago, and I'll talk more about here in a moment. All of these get the bigger punctuation mark of underlining, okay? A ship, Titanic, okay? We underline it for italics, okay? And again, what do I mean underlining for italics? Well, if you're typing it, you can use italics for all of these things that I'm talking about underlining. But when you're handwriting and when you're marking things in your book, you must underline, okay? The name of a ship, Titanic. The name of a sculpture. Or in this case, what I have here the example of is the name of a painting, Mona Lisa. Note how much room on the page that underlining takes as opposed to if I just put two tiny little quotation marks or a set of quotation marks around each of those. Okay, these are big things published on their own, or a big vessel as the Titanic. Okay, finally, the longer works that are published on their own and therefore get the bigger punctuation mark of underlining include the names of books, not the name of a chapter of a book, the name of the book itself. The names of magazines like Time or Cosmopolitan or whatever. The names of newspapers, Wall Street Journal, Bluefield Daily Telegraph. Okay, not the name of an article in such a paper, but the name of the whole paper itself gets the underlining, the big underlining. Musical compositions. This is not a song, okay? This is a big piece of music that is published by itself, such as Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Fifth Symphony would be underlined for italics. Messiah. This is written by Handel. The word Messiah is the name of the work of music, and it is underlined for italics. If you don't think you know what Messiah is, at Christmas time, you should have heard a piece of music that starts out with Hallelujah, 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 Hallelujah. And I did go off key there at the end. That's Handel's Messiah, and Messiah would be underlined. TV and radio series, the name of the show, okay? Not the name of a specific episode, single episode, but the name of the entire series. Okay, Friends would be underlined for italics. For those of you that like The Office would be underlined for italics. All right, epic poems. Now, let me give a word of explanation here. An epic poem is very different from a short regular poem. And if your book says the poem blah 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 and it doesn't say epic or long poem, it's just a short poem and you put quotation marks. But epic poems are produced by themselves because they are as long or almost as long as a book would be. Okay? One example would be Beowulf. Okay? Scores of pages long. Okay? Gets underlining. If you've ever heard of the Iliad and the Odyssey, these are what we would call narrative epic poems. They tell stories. They're extremely long, but they're written in more of a poetic fashion than, say, paragraphs. Okay? They would be underlined. They're not short poems. These are epic long poems. And finally, on our list here, plays. Okay, the name of a play that is produced by itself as one large work would get underlined. Okay, Cats, the longest running play on Broadway. The word cats would be underlined for italics. I'm sorry this recording has been so long, this lecture, but I think you needed it to be long because there's a lot of information here. Also refer to the pages in your book. Okay? If you have questions, please don't hesitate to message me. Have a great day.